Yes, everyone agrees your brother was guilty of the crimes he was accused of. And if the one report I read last night is correct, he at least at one time said that he would rather be put to death than live the rest of his life in prison. I just wanted to ask you to comment on that in view of the...
Well, it does say one thing, and it says if we're talking about retribution and meaningful, appropriate retribution, who's to say which is the harsher punishment? I think there's an element of mercy when you have life without parole, but you're also asking a person to spend the rest of their life facing the consequences of their action, and I think that is a harsh punishment, but it leaves some room for atonement, for reconciliation, for spiritual growth.
I got a call from a guy in California named Bill Babbitt, and this is really the story that hooked me into the death penalty movement. He said that, of course I didn't know his name, but he had seen me on television, and he thought I was perhaps the only person in the country who could understand what he was going through at the moment. And when I heard his story, I realized it was probably true. He told me that 18 years earlier, he had read a newspaper article about an elderly woman whose apartment had been broken into, who had been assaulted, who eventually actually died of a heart attack that night, not of the beating, but of, sort of the psychological trauma. She had been in poor health. And he began to suspect his younger brother of having committed the crime. So I related to this. I knew what that moment was like, how awful that was. And he had gone to the Sacramento Police Department. He told them what he knew, what he suspected. But he also said that they had to understand that his brother wasn't a monster. He wasn't just like a criminal in the ordinary sense, that his brother had been in Vietnam at the age of 18, actually went to the Battle of Khe Sanh. Some of your viewers who are gray-haired like me may remember that it was an awful battle for the American side. We were losing hundreds of troops every month at this base out in the jungle. And Bill's brother, Manny, had been there for 77 days. At one point, he'd actually taken a piece of shrapnel that penetrated his skull. They thought he was dead, actually. He was, they threw his body on the cargo hold of a helicopter that was evacuating dead bodies, and when he came to, he was the only living thing in that cargo hold, and ended up doing 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, 5 major campaigns, came back to the United States. And the mood of our country was not very gracious or grateful. I mean, the Vietnam vets were sort of pariahs. They came back. Manny Babbitt ended up as a street person, living on the streets of Providence, Rhode Island, living in a cardboard box, can you imagine? Didn't get treatment, didn't get help. At this point, he had terrible PTSD, post-traumatic stress. Right. His marriage had fallen apart. His life had fallen apart. He ended up in a mental institution. It was a state-run institution that was an awful institution. He tried to kill himself various times. They had him pumped up on drugs just to keep him quiet. At the end of 3 years, his brother Bill got a call in California informing him that they were looking for a family option for his brother. They asked, would you be willing to take in your brother? And he said, well, of course, he's my brother. So Manny Babbitt was released from that mental institution without any medication, without any referral to a physician. And his discharge plan, in effect, was a bus ticket to California, as much to say, well, Brother Bill, he's your problem now. Yeah. So Manny Babbitt shows up. He's in an awful shape. He's still got serious mental problems. He'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia while in the mental institution. 6 weeks go by. This crime happens. Bill's there in the police office, police department, saying, you got to understand my brother's not a monster. This isn't going to be a death penalty case, is it? And at that point, the police actually promised him that, no, it would not be a death penalty case. They would see to it that his brother got the help that he needed. So Bill's, was conflicted about it all, but he's thinking, this is really going to be good for my brother. He got a little nervous when the police started loading their service revolvers, and he says, oh, don't shoot him. I'll get him out of our house. I'll lure him out. He likes to play pool. And, please, sir, if he runs, don't shoot my brother. I don't want him to die today. I'll tackle him. We'll get him. Anyway, Bill did not understand that it was going to be a death penalty case until he went to his brother's arraignment, and the district attorney there said that she was going to seek the death penalty against this thug who had beat this elderly woman to death. And all of a sudden, you know, it all started. I could relate to the story up at this point, but then Bill told me what it was like on the other end of the justice system. You know, I told you my brother had these wonderful attorneys that saved his life. Bill Babbitt's brother got a court-appointed attorney who was drunk every day of the trial.
Oh, my God.
Had never even tried a criminal case before. At one point during the jury selection, Bill came up to him and said, "Are there going to be any people of color on the jury?" Because he and his brother were African American, they thought, well, they would want a jury that would be immunized against any hint of racism. And his brother's attorney, whether he was stupid or bigoted, I don't know, but he said that he had not had good experience with black people on juries, and he thought it would be better to get a more educated, intelligent jury. So the end result was that Manny Babbitt got an all-white jury that never heard all of the evidence about his mental health history or his war record. He had actually won a Purple Heart in Vietnam. All they knew is he beat the elderly woman who died, so they sentenced him to death. And Bill just thought, okay, this is a mistake. At some point, they're going to catch it. You know, his brother's going to be doing life in prison, but not be put to death. Well, he waited 18 years, and the appeals ran out. So at the point he's calling me saying, "David, I feel so guilty. You know, I feel like I've murdered my own brother." And at that point he couldn't work. He was on antidepressants. He was actually drinking heavily, contemplating suicide. And you know, I'm just saying, "Bill, you know, you didn't mean your brother any harm. You tried to protect other people. You wanted to do the best for your brother. You have nothing to feel guilty about. It's this system. It's this broken system." And but the more I heard the story, I thought, gee, you know, this is America. This can't be happening. I thought, you know, I had access to media. I had Mike Wallace's phone number. I could call reporters at the New York Times. I thought, gee, if we could shine light on this case, perhaps we could save his brother's life. So I had a second awakening. My wife Linda and I went out to California. We spent about 2 weeks with Bill and his wife Linda. You know, we did just about everything but knock on doors. We did newspaper interviews, radio interviews. We did rallies in the park outside the Capitol. That was where I first began to feel kind of disappointed, because the rallies were highly publicized through the media, but almost nobody came. It's like nobody cared. About the only people that really came were other Vietnam vets. You know, they showed up. You know, some of them in their old uniforms, and you know, I'd had a student deferment, you know, during the Vietnam War. I didn't have to go. I didn't have to go to Khe Sanh. But I met people who'd been there, and they said, "David, you know, we have to save Manny's life. You know, I've had flashbacks. I've gone through things. I could have done what he did." You know, I thought we had a chance. We went through a clemency hearing process. We brought things to the governor, and the governor, himself a Vietnam vet, but his experience had, Governor Gray Davis's experience in Vietnam had been very different. He had a desk job in public relations. He carried a typewriter, not a gun. You know, when he came back, he didn't have a cardboard box to come to. He had a cushy job in government through his connections, and he had no sympathy. You know, I guess under political pressure with the victim's family, in this case, really wanting an execution, he denied clemency, and so, ironically, on his brother's 50th birthday, Bill Babbitt went to San Quentin prison and watched his brother be put to death by lethal injection. Nobody ever thanked him. You know, the state of California never thanked him, the prosecutors never thanked him, the police never thanked him, the victim's family never thanked him. His thank you, his only thank you, was a front row seat at his brother's execution.
One of the issues I'll be talking about at the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill Conference here in Helena will be the issue of people with serious mental illnesses on death row. It come to find out that not only are we executing people with serious mental illnesses, but they're really disadvantaged in the system if they don't, if they can't cooperate with their attorneys, if they don't fully understand the legal system. the end result is that we're killing those people because, they're not getting adequate defense or not getting a fair shake within the system, which is just another way that people with disabilities end up being marginalized within the system. No government program is perfect. If you're going to execute people sooner or later, you're going to execute an innocent person. And to me, even one mistake is intolerable. We also had prosecutors and district attorneys actually coming to our state assembly and said, look, I have no moral position for or against the death penalty, but give me $200 million, which is what we spent 10 years on an program, death penalty program that executed no one. Give me $200 million to protect the people that I serve, and I can do it much better than with the death penalty. The death penalty won't stop the next murder, but I tell you what will. It'll be more police on the street, more community policing, more reentry programs, more restorative justice programs, more programs to work with troubled kids, more mental health clinics, more education. These are really rational, responsible, thoughtful ways of responding to crime. The emotional response, the completely understandable reaction. Let's do to this person what they did to somebody else. Doesn't really get us anywhere. It doesn't reduce violence. It doesn't bring healing to murder victim family members. And in effect, it just keeps the cycle going. But I do think the answer is not in another act of violence. The answer has got to be in a resolve to try to create a better, safer, less violent world. We could spend millions of dollars, as we have, most states have done. I'm sure Montana has done, putting a couple of people to death, or we could put our energy, our resources, our tax money into programs that actually support law enforcement, victim services, programs to steer troubled kids in a positive direction. These are ways we can respond to violence as civilized human beings and actually make a difference. To my way of thinking, that's a responsible way of dealing with it.
The irony is that when you execute someone, it says less about them and what they did than it says about us, especially if we've got a system that is unfair. I mean, I've involved in cases where seriously mentally ill people have been executed. We now know that at least 4 totally innocent people have been executed in the United States in the last 30 years. And that's only the ones we know about. We've got a system that literally buries its mistakes. And